So I wanted to do a fairly quick video that introduces you to some of the InDesign basic features. So let's start by opening InDesign, and we're going to create a new document. So we're going to say create new. And you'll notice that we have options to do print. We have some defaults for web or even for mobile. Well, I typically deal with print. And then we have sizes we can choose from. So the default here is legal, letter legal. We have tabloid, or we can customize our own. In this case, I'm going to turn it sideways, just it'll show better on the screen. Facing pages, if you're going to have multiple pages where you have a left and a right, so like a 4-page document, you would click facing pages. If it's a single ad, a single flyer, you do not need facing pages. You can put how many pages you want. If let's say you're doing a magazine article and you're going to be working on pages 18, 19, and 20, you could type in start on page 18. It'll automatically do the page numbering for you. We definitely want to include columns. I'm going to start off with 3. I always make my default columns 1/8 of an inch. Under margins, this is the area around the page. 1/2 an inch is the default. I'll leave that as fine. And then there's a thing called bleed. You always want your bleed to be 1/8 of an inch. That's if anything's going to go off the page, any kind of photo is going to go off the page, any kind of color, you need to take it to the bleed line. And that's another topic for another day. But just know that if you have any color or any photo that's going to go off the page, always include 1/8 of an inch bleed all the way around. So I think we're set to go. I'm going to say create, and it's going to create a new document for me. So when you're looking at the InDesign space, you have a couple of areas. This control area up here at the top, these measurements, this information is going to change depending on what is selected in your workspace area. So if I have a text box selected, the information in this control area is going to deal with fonts, point size, leading, things like that. Over here on the left, these are just my tools. So I have tools to make a text box. I have tools to move things around. I have tools to make gradients, enlarge. There's the eyedrop tool. So those are my tools. And then over here on the right, you have control panels or panels of different types of features of InDesign as well. You can customize these. Some of these you can get rid of if you never use them. You can add more. If for some reason you were to accidentally throw away a control panel, like this is a swatches panel, if I throw it away and it's gone, they're all under window. You can go back and find it. So it'd be color swatches, and then I can just drag it back where I want it. And that's how you can keep track of your panels on the right side. So we set up a new document. Let's start by adjusting the columns. So I told you when I first created this document, I made it 3 columns. Columns are important, and that's a whole nother design element, talking about grids and alignment and that kind of stuff. You start off with a number of columns, but if for any reason you want to change it, you can go to Layout, Margins and Columns, and easily adjust it to 4 or 5 or 6. So remember, if you do an odd number of columns, it kind of forces you to do an asymmetric design, which typically can be more engaging as opposed to just a centered, even, symmetric page design. Typically comes across a little bit more boring. Not always, but that's just a good rule of thumb. So, and also the more columns you do, typically the more options you have as far as photo sizes, text sizes, that kind of stuff. So I'm going to go back to 3 or to 4 for now. All right. Also, right now my rulers are showing, but I can turn them off, and sometimes they might be turned off on your file if you haven't normally turned them on. But to turn them on, you just go into View Rulers, or you can also do the Command R. And again, your pull down menus are going to show you shortcuts, things that you use often. You might want to learn some of these shortcuts to help you save some space, some time when you're doing the key commands. So Command R on, Command R off. All right, so I'm obviously going to leave them on. Also, you can use guides to help you align certain things. So let's say I knew I wanted a guide that was an inch from the top. If you do have your ruler showing, you can just drag down from the top, go to 1 inches down, and have a guide. Excuse me. And to turn them on and to turn them off, hide guides, semicolon, command semicolon will turn them on and off. So let's see that. Command semicolon, command semicolon. Also, sometimes people have hide frame edges turned on. I usually turn that off and I leave it off for good. I do actually do that before I have any InDesign files open because I don't like that feature at all. Frame edges. So if you had show frame edges, even when you hide your guides, you'll still see the edges of some of your boxes, and that's because show frame edges is turned on. So I suggest turning that off. So we've got rulers, we've got guides. Now let's bring in some text. So in InDesign, to bring in a photo or text, it's the same command. You say File, Place. And then you're going to have to navigate to your computer where you have your font or where you have your text. I'm going to bring in the text first. This is just a Word document. So you click on it and then you say Open. And you'll notice my cursor is now turned into like a little mini preview of what is on the clipboard. So I'm just going to click and drag, and I'm going to go to the whole page. And I haven't let go yet, and now I'm going to let go. So I need to go a little bit further down. There we go. All right, so here's my text. It's going across all 4 columns of type. And again, as I select different tools on the left, this information across the top is going to change. So right now, with my selection tool, I can click on the box and move it around. I can click on the box and shorten it. When I use the type tool and I select what's inside the box, now it's selected. I can select the text and I can change the font to something other than Times New Roman. I could select certain words or certain sentences and make them bold. I can change the color. I'm doing Command Z for undo. I can adjust the leading. I can adjust the point size. So this is all this stuff is you use your control panel at the top. And again, if I have the type tool selected, I'll see this. If I switch over to the selection tool, it changes and now it's my XY coordinates. Does the text box have a skew on it? How many columns of type is it? All that good stuff. So I'm going to take it back to the width of all 4 columns. With my selection tool, notice that this one text box is going across 4 columns of type, but I can make it 2 columns of type, 3 columns of type, or 4 columns of type. I'm going to make it 1/8 of an inch. And I'm also going to shorten the text box so we can see more of it. So with one text box with 1 column, one text box with 2 columns, 3 columns doesn't align to my grid, so I would never do that one with a 4-column grid or 4 columns. And then notice as I shorten my box, the type will adjust. So being able to adjust your columns is a nice feature. Let's see what else. Color. So right now my text box is filled with nothing and there's no stroke on it. Well, If I wanted to fill it with something, I don't have a lot of custom colors. These are default colors. I'm just going to use yellow now. You'll notice that creates the background for the yellow. If I switch over to the stroke, I could have put a black stroke and enlarge it so you can see it. Notice how there's a red plus sign there. That means there is type that is not fitting in this text box. So I'm going to need to pull that down a little bit so that all the type appears. All right, so let me do the command semicolon, which is hide my guides. That's neat and that's nice that you can create one text box that has multiple columns and you've got color and border. But notice I have this edge right here where my type is going right up to the border. That's something we do not want. InDesign has a nice way of getting rid of that. If you go under Object, Text Frame Objects, it's also Command B if you use this often. You'll notice that there's an inset spacing. And if I bump that up, Preview is selected so you can see what's going on. See, it's giving me this buffer all the way around. And because the link is selected, if I make changes to one, it's going to change all four. I could do, let's say, more on the left side, but if I select them all, then they'll all be the same. But notice how that makes it much easier to read, much more visually appealing. But again, I've got my red plus, so that means there's extra type there that I need to pull down so that it all fits. Okay. Again, you change your fonts. You change the alignment. Sometimes you do first line indents. That's what's right here. Sometimes you do space after. That's what's going on right here. You can change it to 0. Thought I'd change it to 0. And so when you have paragraphs of type, you either have to do one or the other. You have to do a first line indent, or you have to do space after because you need to know where the new paragraph starts. So something like that. All right, so we have our type. So what about our photo? How do we bring in a photo? So I'm going to zoom out a little bit so we can see the whole page. For some reason, my site is way too big. I'm going to shorten it a little bit. I changed my screen resolution for the video, and I'm not used to this large size. There we go. So, same thing. I'm going to go to my selection tool. I'm going to say File, Place. And this time I'm going to bring in a photo, an image. We'll say OK. All right, notice my photo now took the place of my type. The reason it did that was because I had my text box selected when I said place. I don't want that to happen. So I'm going to undo that. Undo, replace. With nothing selected, I'll say File, Place, select the photo, OK. And now instead of my cursor showing text, it's showing actually a graphic of what this photo looks like. So if I do Command semicolon, I can show my guides again. And I'm going to just draw a box that's going to go across, let's say, one column. All right. So I'll bring my text box, make it bigger. Bring my text up here. Let's say we'll just put it right here. And shorten my text box. Now, the type is going behind my photo. That's not something I'd want to do, obviously. So there's an icon right here called Text Wrap, and I want to turn that on. And when I have my photo selected, it now is going to wrap the type around. But notice how tight it is along the edges. I can control the space around each side, this is just the bottom, and if I do the right, it'll go there. Because we always want breathing room. So no matter where I move this photo, the text wrap is going to adjust around it. All right, that's a pretty neat feature. All right, one of the most complicated parts about InDesign, though, and getting used to some of these tools, is the resizing of photos. When I move a photo, I just use the selection tool. I click and drag it. But if I'm not careful, if I double click it and move it, I'm actually not moving the photo. I'm moving the photo that's within the box. Okay, so, and that's what the direct selection tool does. So again, to move it, I just click and drag. But if I double click, it turns, I don't know if you can see it, it kind of turns orange. Or if I click and hold it too long, it'll do the same thing. So if you ever are trying to move it and you notice that your box is kind of staying, but the content's moving, that's what's going on. All right. So let's say I want to resize this and make it twice as big. You click on the corner, hold down the Command Shift key, and you got to give it a minute. And then as you start dragging, it's going to get bigger and it's going to stay in proportion. All right, I'm going to do Command Z and undo that, and I'll show you. I could just click and drag, but what it's doing is just making my text box big, photo box bigger. It's not affecting the photo at all. So that's not really a great option. Again, it's hold down Command Shift, click on a corner, hold it for just a second, and then if you start dragging, I have not let go of those two commands. I can enlarge it and make it bigger. All right. Let me zoom out a little bit so we can see a little bit more of the page. Still don't know why that's doing that. Sorry about that. All right, so that's one way of, if you hold down the space bar, by the way, it lets you just move your page over. Another way to work with photos within a box is, let's say I do have a box and I know it needs to be 2.4 inches by, let's say, 5 inches. If I have a box drawn, I can go under Object, Fitting, and say fill frame proportionately. And it will fill the frame as big as possible, but keeping the photo in proportion. You notice, though, there's stuff being cropped. If I double click it, you can see this much of the photo is not there, it's showing, and this much is not showing. I can click and drag and like re-crop it within. I can also just go up here and increase using, I'm dealing with what's inside the box. I can increase the size as well. Or I can say File, Object Fitting, fit content proportionally instead of fill content proportionally. And it's going to make the photo fit within it, the entire photo, in proportion. So then what I can do is drag this down, and then my text box will be, a photo box will be just as big as it needs to be to contain all the photo. So play around with these object fitting options. There's a clear a center where it'll center it within the box. But it's going to take some practice getting used to moving versus moving the box versus moving what's inside the box. All right, so let's say I don't want 4 columns of type anymore. I want 2 columns of type. If I were to do something like this, notice the text wrap is too much now, so I would adjust the text wrap so it looked a little bit better. And then I'd probably have to do a text wrap on the left side, which I didn't have earlier, to protect that edge right there. Anyway, so that's kind of a basic of how you bring in text, how you bring in a photo, how you move them around the page. There's also, let's say we wanted to add more colors than just the basic colors that were in my palette earlier when I was picking this yellow. So if you click on swatches right here, these are the basic colors. And again, if you select a text box or a box of any kind, you'll notice up here I have the yellow is what's the fill and the black is the stroke. I can easily make changes to them. Instead of 100%, I can do 25% tint of the yellow and it's just going to lighten it up. What if I wanted the type though to be a different color? I can click on type, and then instead of the color there's a black, I can make it magenta or red. And then you can put a stroke on type. I just don't recommend it. Maybe if you have a very large header or something, it might be okay. Typically I never put strokes on text, especially if it's smaller. So again, this affects the text, this affects the actual box, the text box. If you needed to add a new photo, a new color for some reason, you could say not new color swatch. If you know the CMYK value, you can add it here. If for some reason, typically what we do is we use a PMS book, and if there's a number like Lewis's number is PMS 202. So I would click on the Panto solid color, come up here and type in 202, say add, and then now 202 is going to be added to my document. I can, let's say, change the stroke to that, and then I can maybe make the fill 15% gray. Do command semicolon, I'm going to hide my guides. Probably would change the font. Obviously, it needs some sort of a header, but this is how we get started with just the basics of InDesign. So another thing to do, notice how right now this is still Untitled 1. I have not saved this yet. So InDesign does keep a temporary file, so if your file crashes, a lot of times you'll save. It'll save some of the most recent stuff you've done. It won't automatically do it, so periodically you need to make sure you're saving as you go. So to do that, the first time you do File Save As, you tell it where you want to put it. I always suggest, like if this is a student assignment, you want to be descriptive. I would want you to put your last name, and then underscore, and then what type of piece this is. I'm just going to do a test page. I don't typically do spaces in my names because I use Dropbox to send links to people, and when you have a space in a web link like that, it really adds those extra characters, so I don't mess with that. I typically do upper and lower to help separate words, and then you would just say save, and then this is going to be a nice way of naming. It helps me as a faculty member know who sent in what, and it also helps you keep track of what you're doing. So that's just some basic InDesign stuff. If you have any questions, be sure to ask, and we'll just see you another day.